Hello my beautiful friends, it's Amanda here, and today we're going to talk about these new 9-pan palettes. These are currently available. They launched a little while back, but when ColourPop sent out their little PR package, they sent me 4 of these, so I ordered the remaining 5 because I knew I wanted to do a big, mega, comprehensive swatch comparison video for you, especially because I do think there are lots and lots of dupes already existing in the ColourPop line. So I ordered the remaining 5 palettes that I didn't get in PR. Hence why this video is a little bit later than usual, but hopefully this will be helpful and worth it. These are all priced at $14 US a piece. You can find all of them at ColourPop and then most of these on the Target website. Not all of them are available on the Target website. I don't know if they're just sold out or if some of them are exclusive to ColourPop, but either way, these are all currently available. If you decide to shop on the ColourPop site, you can use my affiliate code. It's just my first name, Amanda, and that will save you 10% on pretty much everything on the site. And there will be another Catching Up with ColourPop video soon because I need to go over their floral collection and the Jelly Much. So we will get to that, but today I have so many swatches. I think I have over 40 different swatches in this video. So first, let's start with the neutral palettes. I'm going to show you a close-up of the palette, the packaging, and all of that good stuff for each one of these. But I'm not going to go into too much detail about that kind of stuff because I feel like it's pretty straightforward and I feel like we've gone over that a bunch of times. I really want to focus on swatching in this video. So for each palette, I'll show you the close-up, blah, 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 and then we'll do the finger and brush swatches just for the palette that we're focusing on. That way you can see the performance difference in those different application methods. You know I always use a dry brush, no primer, all of that good stuff. And then we're going to have varying numbers of comparisons for each palette. The most I have is for this Feelin Toasty palette because there are just so many similar palettes. I probably could have done 100 more swatch comparisons, but I'm trying to keep this video as balanced as possible between giving you a lot of information, but not making it so dense and so long that it becomes no longer helpful. You're going to notice that I use both current and discontinued palettes in my swatch comparisons. I partly do this to show you if you have something similar already in your collection. Maybe there's something currently available that you see the comparison and you actually end up being more interested in the comparison than the palette that we're focusing on. Or maybe there's a discontinued palette out there that you're missing, you're regretting picking up, or maybe it was your favorite and you've already worked through it and you're looking for a suitable replacement. These are all different reasons why I will include both current and past palettes. So just because things are similar doesn't always mean that's a bad thing, because sometimes you may find similar shades in a formula that you like a little bit better, or similar shades to something that is no longer available and now you can get it. I also think it's worth noting, especially in this video, because you're really going to be able to notice this, some of the swatches will really show the difference in formula as well. I do think that this Feelin Toasty palette versus Bare Necessities is the perfect example because the shades are pretty much the exact same, but you can tell that the Bare Necessities colors, even though my Bare Necessities palette is years old at this point, are just more opaque, more consistent, and depending on which formula you prefer, I think it's good to be able to see those in contrast with one another. I hope that my point's getting across there. Basically, these do seem to be a little bit less opaque, a little bit more of a thin and sometimes inconsistent formulation, I definitely noticed that when I was swatching too, even just the feel on my fingertips when I was dipping into these shadows, it was pretty noticeable. Now, a note about this packaging, because this is the clear plastic lid in a plastic packaging versus a cardboard packaging. Personally, I do prefer the cardboard packaging. I think it's more lightweight. I think it feels more expensive. And also, just to be completely honest with you, as somebody who has dropped many a palette, I think that cardboard palettes can absorb the shock of being dropped better than plastic palettes can. I'm guessing, and this is just a guess, I don't have any sort of insight into this, but my guess is that they did the clear plastic lids for these because they're meant to be displayed in Target. And at least my Target beauty section doesn't have testers anymore. They did once upon a time, but now you just have to look at the products on the shelf. And I think that in the Target retail space, it probably makes more sense and is probably easier for consumers if these have that clear plastic lid versus the opaque. I mean, even these old plastic containers were opaque and had a mirror inside. So I'm guessing that's why. I just feel like that makes sense, but I don't know. Maybe they're making moves towards this packaging. I certainly hope not. I do prefer the cardboard. We have, again, a lot of neutrally comparisons for the Deja Brew palette. After you see all of these neutrally palette comparisons, I think it becomes pretty clear that if you are interested in these little neutral releases from ColourPop, then it's definitely worth it to just go for a couple of their larger neutral mega palettes. I do a lot of these palette comparison videos, especially for ColourPop, and one thing that pops up over and over again while I'm compiling these swatch comparisons is the fact that the Bare Necessities palette, the Stone Cold Fox palette, and to a certain degree, either Rock Candy or Smokin' Roses can almost always exactly dupe or get very, very close to the majority of neutral palette releases from ColourPop. I would say the vast majority. I don't want to overstate the case here, but if you are a neutral lover, I definitely recommend just going for a couple of these mega palettes. Bare Necessities and Stone Cold Fox, to a slightly lesser degree, are two of my most reliable, reached for, constant companion type of palettes because they do really just have everything I need as far as neutrals go. I know that the size is a little bit overwhelming and that has deterred a lot of people, and I definitely understand that. I think these little cute, more curated, quick and easy type of palettes are very appealing in that respect. But I do just want to remind you that the eyeshadow pans in almost all ColourPop palettes, not the square pans in the clear plastic containers, but all of these circular pan eyeshadow palettes, the pans are magnetic, so you can pop them out and you can curate a little selection if you want to travel with them, or even if you just feel overwhelmed by the palette and you just want to use it in your house, you can take out some of those eyeshadows, curate a little collection, 3, 6, 12 of them at a time, put them into a smaller magnetic palette for just your own personal comfort. If that makes it easy for you, you are totally allowed to do that. This is one of those scenarios where you can have your cake and eat it too. You can get the good value for your dollar, the great value of a large collection of neutral shadows, if that's what you like to pull from. And you can also have a smaller, more curated selection that you just create yourself. Get yourself a little magnetic palette, pop out, 9 shades at a time, give yourself a little selection. Then you can switch them out and you can keep that selection fresh. You're still using up the shadows that you have, but you're also getting a new little palette all the time. I think this is a great way to make your collection work for you, to make your makeup work for you, especially when you're seeing these new neutral 9 pans popping up over and over again and you're feeling drawn towards them. Just use that as inspiration for the 9 or whatever shades you pull out for the week out of your mega palettes, and boom, it's like you have this palette. Not only do I think you get a better value for your dollar, a price per gram type of situation, but I just think that the formula is noticeably better on the mega palettes versus these new 9-pan releases. That obviously doesn't apply to all of the ColourPop 9-pans because you'll see plenty of comparisons here where it's like night and day. So unfortunately, it's not just the mega palettes that I recommend over these new 9-pans. I do think that in general, these are a more lackluster formula. Some are better than others, and I think you're going to notice that throughout the swatches here. Sadly, the purple palette that comes up later, it's called Plum Szn, was the lowest performing of the bunch for me, and I love purple eyeshadow. It's one of my top favorite eyeshadow colors to wear, but sadly, a lot of these 9-pan palettes just aren't really living up to my expectation. As somebody who really, really obviously loves ColourPop palettes, and I love the brand, I just don't think that these are up to their usual standard. They're not terrible by any means. I've been wearing a couple of these palettes over the last few days to really give them a fair shot and see how they do on the eyes. And I would say they are fine, average, not terrible. They're not disappearing off my eyes or anything. They are just taking a little bit more work than I've come to expect to get the color payoff, the opacity, and the blend that I prefer. But as far as my personal preference goes and my personal expectations surrounding ColourPop eyeshadows, I do think these are a little bit below average. I don't know if the packaging is somehow playing a role. I don't know if there's been a formula change, but I definitely do notice a difference. After spending several days with these palettes, swatching them, wear testing them in my real life, I would say the worst offenders, like the worst formula, worst performance for me, sadly, is Plum Szn, the purple palette. Also, sadly, the Fresh Greens palette. Purple and green are my favorite eyeshadow colors. I also found Blue Velvet to be a little bit lackluster, and the Feelin Toasty palette, the very first one that we looked at, I felt that one was pretty lackluster as well. The rest seemed to be medium, like at least close to average, if not on par with what I expect from ColourPop shadows. This one that we're looking at now, the Mauvin Up palette, is actually pretty fine performance-wise. The mattes seem pretty good in this one, which is where a lot of the others are really, really below average for me. But I do think that the shimmers in here are a little bit too similar. This is just maybe a little bit more one note than I would want it to be. But overall, at least performance-wise, it's not bad. I also think that Blush Baby and Peach Out, those kind of pinky peachy tones, performed pretty well. And then the cooler toned neutral palettes, Gone Metal and Deja Brew, those have been very hit or miss for me because I have worn those quite a bit on my eyes. I've just been in a more neutral, cool tone state of mind lately, and those have been very hit and miss for me. Some days the shadows went on really easily and they were fine, and other days I felt like I really had to work hard to get a look that I liked. So those are sort of up in the air for me. I don't really necessarily think any of these are must-have palettes as far as I'm concerned, but I realize that, of course, not everybody has a million billion ColourPop palettes to compare these to, and I also realize that Target can be a lot more accessible than even Ulta can be. I know that that may sound crazy if you live somewhere. Typically, they're kind of close to one another. I lived in Hawaii at a time when there was no Ulta on any of the islands. So I had to go on a 6-hour plane ride to go to an Ulta, but I could drive to a Target in 20 minutes. So I know that it might seem kind of crazy if you live somewhere like I do now, where Ulta and Target are a stone's throw away from each other. You know, you could walk from one to the other and they seem very equally accessible. But there are a lot of places here in the US where Target is a lot easier to get to, particularly if you want to purchase in person and not wait online. And you know, sometimes Ulta's shipping hasn't really been the best for me. Personally, I've been getting a lot of things broken from them lately. So I like the idea of a lot of these palettes being more accessible to people, easier to get your hands on. You know, a great, reliable $14 eyeshadow palette is awesome. I really like the idea of a lot of folks who can't just walk into an Ulta and buy their ColourPop being able to walk into a Target and buy their ColourPop. I think that's great. So I don't want to completely dismiss the accessibility issue. And I know all of my international friends are probably throwing their popcorn at the screen right now. I'm sorry. I know. I wish you had an accessible option as well. But with how successful this Ulta and Target rollout has been, I don't think that it's unreasonable to expect that we may see ColourPop in some mainstream retailers overseas as well. I would not be surprised at all. Again, I have no inside information about this. I do think it would be a good move for the brand. I think it would be great for their customers. I would love to see ColourPop available on Beauty Bay or in Boots or Superdrug or something like that. I'm sorry, I've never actually been to Europe. I'm basing all of this information off of literally people who I watch on YouTube talking about shopping for makeup. So I'm sure there are a lot of great retailer options outside of the US that ColourPop could feasibly branch into. Mecca for my Australian friends, that's what it's called, right? Mecca Maxima. Those are just the options that popped into my head as somebody who has not traveled much outside of the US. I think those would all be a great option. So I'm sure that somebody who was more well-traveled and more worldly and more smart than me would be able to figure out some great retailers for ColourPop. And, you know, in my mind, going into Ulta and Target is a step towards that. I would love that for my international friends because I see you guys in the comments always saying you're struggling to get a hold of things. The shipping takes a million billion years and you have to pay fees depending on what country you live in. You may have to pay customs fees and all kinds of crazy charges. So I would love to see ColourPop continue to branch out their accessibility. Stuff like availability, expense, accessibility is always on my mind. So I hesitate to say, oh no, don't buy this. If you're really excited about this and this is something that you can actually feasibly get your hands on, then I am not going to stand in your way. I am not going to rain on your parade. But on the other hand, if you do have access to these comparison palettes, I would recommend almost every single comparison palette over these new 9 pads. I don't love saying that. I just wish if they were going to give us the same colors again, that at least they would be performing as well as the last time they gave us these colors. That sounded way shadier coming out of my mouth than it did in my head. Oh man, I'm so sorry. Okay, you know, I am not here to be a hater. You know I love ColourPop. And I'll just go ahead and spoil it for you, but I do really like the other things that I'm going to show you in my next Catching Up with ColourPop video. So the Jelly Much shadows, really like those. I have a video about those. Just side note, if you're feeling confused about how to use them, I have a Jelly Much 101 video for you. And also the new floral collection is pretty cute too. And I do think that those palettes, even though they're in this same type of packaging with the clear lid that I don't love, I do think that at least the ones I've swatched seem softer and more in line with the quality that I know and love from my beloved ColourPop palettes. Oh, I think this is the most painful of all of the palettes because this was the one that I most wanted to be excited about. And I think that the swatches are pretty much going to speak for themselves. These are just very patchy, very thin, and just really felt dry to the touch. Maybe I got a dud palette. I do think sometimes that just happens. But this, for me, of the 9 palettes that I have here, is by far the lowest performing formula-wise. Both finger application and brush swatches just didn't do it for me. I mean, It's My Pleasure palette and even my Lilac You a Lot, but definitely It's My Pleasure palette is so old, many, many years old, and it is still not as dry and patchy as the Plum Szn palette. I did have to combine a couple of palettes to really get an all purple palette. So I will say that is a good improvement. I love seeing this very plummy color story throughout. In the past, they have done a lot of neutrals or very, very pink shades thrown in with their purple palettes. So it's nice to see a very, very monochromatic purple palette. I just wish that it worked a little bit better for me. I will warn you, so hopefully you won't get too upset with me, but for the green palette, the Fresh Greens, I only have 2 comparisons, and for Blue Velvet, I only have 1. I don't know if you can tell with these swatches on my arms here, but my arm was starting to get very, very raw and worn out and quite a bit stained at this point. So I really just needed to slow down on the swatches. I went a little ham on the neutral swatches, but also as far as the color story goes, I really would need to combine several palettes together to be able to get a decent comparison for you. They haven't done a lot of very green palettes in this type of tone. We do have the Just My Luck palette, which is a lot more emerald green, and we have the Mint to Be, which is obviously a very pastel minty green. But as far as this very olive green, I guess you would call it, type of color scheme, they haven't really done this a lot. So again, props for that. I do like the idea of this color scheme, and I think the shimmers perform pretty well in this, and also that really bright green matte towards the middle. But the rest of the green mattes were not super great for me. They are a little bit better with brush application, but they just were a little bit dry and patchy feeling. Not as bad as Plum Szn, but definitely not what I want out of life with my eyeshadows. And when you see them swatch next to the Child palette matte, you can tell they're just so different. The mattes in the Child palette are so smooth and they just glide over the skin. They don't take any work to show up for the pigmentation. And Sage the Day is also a little bit better. I think the Child palette formula-wise is the best of the ones we're looking at here. And I would say Sage the Day is in the middle, Fresh Greens at the bottom, at least for me. You know, maybe you're looking for something a little bit less opaque, and that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you prefer, then there is something for everybody. For the most part with makeup, just because something doesn't fit my preference doesn't automatically make it a bad product. It just might be better suited for somebody else. This is the reason why I think it's so great to watch a lot of different reviews and listen to all different types of opinions, different styles, different skin types, different skin tones. Everybody is going to have a slightly different experience, and also, you know, obviously based on your preferences. Maybe you don't want a super bright, you know, creamy, opaque, bright blue. Maybe you want a soft little wash of blue. Maybe you want to be able to layer and build up and do more of a watercolor type of vibe. I think that's good. And you could do that with these. I think there's a place in the world for a lot of things. Not everything. Okay, let's not get carried away. There are some products that are just not going to be any good for anybody. But most of the time, I think that you can find somebody out there who can love and appreciate something that just doesn't work for you. Like I said, only one comparison for this one. It's the Blue Moon palette. You don't really need any other comparisons because look, these are almost practically exactly the same colors. Not a perfect dupe, okay? I will say they're not perfectly duping, but I do think you're getting pretty much the same eye looks out of these palettes. Whew, okay, that's it. That's the last comparison. I have to stop talking because I have been recording this voiceover for over 25 minutes now, and my voice is starting to get worn out. So thank you for taking the time to listen through all my babbling and wading through all of those swatches. I really, really appreciate it. I would love to hear what you think about these palettes. Maybe you've already tried them and you had a totally different experience. I like to hear about that kind of stuff. I get a lot of great opinions from you, a lot of great tips, a lot of great everything from you. So make sure you leave all your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye! How about that matching nail? Oh yeah, matching nail game. Okay, I love your face so much, and I'll see you real soon. Bye!